Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. I'm teaching a graduate course in career counseling, and one of the students said at the end of the second class, said, "You use a lot of Nemkoisms. These were kind of little offbeat or oddball phrases or sentences or words," and he suggested I compile them in a book. I don't have enough for a book, but I wrote an article about them. And it'd be easy for me to simply read those to you here. But recently, a commenter on these videos said they like it better when I extemporize. So I'm going to, for each of these 32 things, I'm going to simply read the oddball statement, and they're mostly contrarian. They're defying conventional wisdom around career counseling and around just career issues in general. And then I'm going to extemp on each one of them. The first one is pick early. You know, the conventional wisdom is that you should go to college and explore, and even after college with your liberal arts degree, you should take time to explore, go climb the mountain to meet the guru and meditate, and the path shall emerge. Unfortunately, at least from my experience, and I've had 5,500 clients, most of that tends to be less successful and lead to less focus and less satisfaction in a career, and less money, than picking something early. You can always, it's like if you want to sail from San Francisco to Hawaii, you can plan all you want, but unless you start out and see what the winds are like and clever little paths and whatever, you're probably never going to get to Hawaii. So it's usually wiser to, at whatever point you are now, pick something. Start going down that path. You may indeed find that you like it, but if you don't, you may find out about a side path that you couldn't have seen at the beginning of the trail. And certainly you will have made connections, you will have learned some specific skills that you could apply in some other context. So that's why my first offbeat, contrarian recommendation regarding career issues is to pick early. The next one is that status is the enemy of contentment. We have a natural tendency to go, he's a lawyer, she's a doctor, he's an investment banker. But in reality, there is a huge price that gets paid for people in those highly competitive fields. The stress is so great that really substance abuse is rampant. You know, you don't realize this, but there have been many articles written about the substance abuse problems rampant in doctors, lawyers, actors, as you may have heard more often. And yet there is often more. There is more satisfaction often, and more satisfaction, more likelihood of success, if you pick some under the radar career. And a few of them that I like very much are program evaluator, which is every program that the government or a foundation gives a grant to needs an evaluation. So somebody comes in there to evaluate the program, make suggestions for improvement, make suggestions to whether it should be continued to be funded. It's a very cool career because you get to experience new things all the time, new programs, new innovations. But there's going to be less stress than being an investment banker or a corporate lawyer or a bond trader or any of those cool things, or an actor where you're endlessly auditioning. Or a musician, you're endlessly auditioning. Or a novelist, you're endlessly writing your book and submitting it and hoping to get an agent, let alone getting it published, let alone a screenwriter where your odds are 1 in a zillion. So it's often wise to go under the radar and recognize that status is the enemy of contentment. The next one of my little phrases is do what you love and starve. There's always a few people who make big money following their passion. They become the head of an environmental organization. They become a pro athlete. They become an artist whose openings in New York City or MoMA. But for every one of those, there are 10,000 people who are waiting tables, literally and metaphorically. Often, and this is one of the things I'm sure about in life, is that people's career contentment comes less from being in a career they feel passionate about, a passion-driven field, and more about whether their boss is reasonable, whether the work isn't too hard or easy, the pay is reasonable, the commute's reasonable, there's opportunities for learning, it's ethical work, and it's so much easier to get those jobs than one of those really lofty jobs that everybody's passionate about, because everybody's passionate just about one of a few things: sports, entertainment, the environment, helping the poor, fashion. There's only a few of those. Broadcasting. You're more likely to be satisfied if you go away from the madding crowd. Okay, so that's why I say do what you love or stuff. And there's a corollary phrase that don't follow, what I say is don't follow your passion as a career. Do it as a hobby. I love acting. I love playing the piano. I like doing creative things. I love writing. If I expected to make a living at it, I'd be eating ramen and cat food. So instead, I'm a career counselor, and I make my living with that. And because I'm not materialistic, that gives me the freedom to go and do a lot of these other things at no money, like my one-man show. Sometimes I get paid for it, but often I don't. I love doing the show. I do it as a fundraiser for nonprofits, for theaters, all over the Bay Area. I've done it as a freebie for the San Francisco Public Library. I've done it as a freebie for Mensa. I did it at the Mensa convention in Los Angeles. I couldn't do that if it takes a lot of work to write the show, prepare the show, move the stuff, schlep the stuff there, perform the show, get singers to sing in the show with me, etc. If I had to make a living at that, I wouldn't have the luxury of doing it. And this way I get, because I'm not materialistic. Look at this old shirt I'm wearing. This is a perfect metaphor for the way I live my life. You can get to do all those cool things, but if you do what you love, you better do it as a hobby unless you are an absolute superstar or extraordinarily well connected or you're sleeping with the boss. Okay, the next phrase. Beware of what I call false precision. When you're looking for a job, everybody you network with is going to say, well, what are you looking for? And the more specific you can be, the better. Because then they don't have to think. And it's more likely they can say yes or no, and that's it. But the reality is that most often, most people are in reality open to a far wider range of jobs. Or if you're choosing a career, there isn't one magical career that's sitting there and that's only the right one. To get overly specific is what I call false precision. So better if you're, for example, trying to be in a helping profession doing some kind of counseling, rather than insisting that you're going to be working on eating disorders or youth with bipolar or whatever. Yes, eventually you want to specialize, but especially if you're breaking in, and especially if you're trying to network, unless you already have that specialty, which I do encourage, by the way. I do encourage specializations while you're in school so you can really claim some real expertise. But if you're in a quasi-desperate position looking for work, don't say on one hand, I'm open to anything, because then you sound desperate and nobody will help you. Or don't be hyper-specific. Be in the sweet spot of specificity. Real precision. So that if Marty Nemko were looking for a job, I would say I simply want to use a job, something I know a lot about career and I know a lot about education. And I like thinking on my feet, speaking or in writing. Might you know of somebody who could use somebody like that? I wouldn't say I'm interested only in being a career counselor. I'm only interested in being an educational reformer. I'm interested in corporate training. By being in that sweet spot, not saying I'm open to anything, but not being too narrow, I am dramatically increasing the chance of somebody being able to help me, and I might be equally happy in one of those fields rather than if I said I want to be a career counselor. Okay, the next phrase I use is don't necessarily turn down a crap job that falls in your lap. Jobs don't usually fall in your lap at random. Usually somebody, a friend, a family member, whatever, has thought you'd be good at it, and therefore they're willing to go through the effort to open that door for you. And even if it seems like a dead-end job, very often, unless you know you have lots of other options, it's wise to take it and use it as a launch pad, even if it seems dead-end. The example I like to use is a ditch digger. Let's say the job you can get is a ditch digger in a cemetery. That's about as bottom of the barrel, pardon the pun, as one could come up with. And yet, if you say, I'm going to use it as a launch pad, I'm going to network with everybody there, from the clerics who come in to the staff there, to the people who make the monuments, to everything, people who do cremations. The more you talk to people, the more you'll get some option that's going to be better than ditch digger, and you can use it as a launch pad. Especially if you say, okay, I happen to run into somebody who's an expert at burials at sea. Well, damn it, I'm going to read everything I can. I'm going to Google search burials at sea. I'm going to see if there are conferences for cremation professionals, and I'm going to learn everything I can so that when I do get an interview, I'm going to get a chance to get that job. Can you see how that even that really low level, again, pardon the pun, job of ditch digger in the cemetery can, instead of being dead end, it can be a launch pad. Okay, so that phrase was, don't necessarily turn down a crap job that falls in your lap. The next one, one of my oddball phrases, my contrarian phrases. The Myers-Briggs type indicator is more of a horoscope than a test. It really is. This is, everybody likes to be the Myers-Briggs because it puts you in a nice category. Oh, I'm an INTJ, and that means I should do this, and that means I should have these friends. Oh, I'm an ENFP, so I should do this as a career. It feels comforting, but it's invalid. All of the legitimate examinations of the reliability and validity of the Myers-Briggs type indicator show that it, like all personality tests, is weak. It is normally not wise to rely on that at all. I'll stop there. There was a guy who's a University of New Mexico professor who said it a little more colorfully. He said, do not treat the scores of the Myers-Briggs as anything more than astrology. Okay, the next set of unconventional wisdom, what this student called Nemkoisms, liked, or is in the area of training. And one is that degrees tend to be overrated. I ask you to so often, think about all the courses you've taken at the great cost and time. How much do you really remember? So much of us forget so much. And yes, employers like the piece of paper, no question. But you can often compensate for the lack of a piece of paper at infinitely less cost and time by foregoing state you, let alone private you, in favor of what I call UU, which is a combination of finding a mentor who helps you select what to read, if you can't, and what conferences to go to, have conversations with them, and if you can't find a mentor, simply using Google as your mentor to find articles on the topics of interest, finding a professional association that is specialized in your area of interest, going to the conference, keeping a log. Every time you learn a nugget, something that's of value and not obvious, you write it in a Microsoft Word file, and then you assemble all those into what I call a white paper, which synthesizes all those nuggets, and you use that when you're applying for a job, and you say, I chose to not get this degree, but I like to think that having done this very practical learning on my own, I proved not only that I'm a self-starter, but that I've learned a lot of practical value. Please see the attached white paper. So, of course, there are sometimes you need a degree, and many people need the structure of a professor flogging them with the midterm is going to be this date, the finals that date, read these pages by this date. I got it. I understand that. But at least before you reflexively go and spend the money and time on a degree, consider whether UU might be a better option. Okay, the next of my contrarian Nemkoisms, again to use the term my student used, I wouldn't be as egotistical to call them that myself, is regarding landing a good job. The truth is that landing a good job is a war. Unless you're a superstar, or unless you have inordinate connections, normally just sending in a decent resume and cover letter is not going to get you the job, because these days it's so easy for employers to place an ad on a LinkedIn or on a Craigslist or on an Indeed that your chances are really very, very poor. If I can be candid, your chances do improve if you're in, let's just say it's a desired demographic, but especially if you're not in a desired demographic, you'd be very wise to think of it as a war, where in addition to a carefully tailored, individualized cover letter and resume, you include a piece of collateral material like the aforementioned white paper, like a business proposal for what you would do in the first 30 days, a portfolio of your work samples, something that will distinguish you. But make sure that all that stuff is curated, so it's not just, so it really feels like it's something that target employer would want. And I'll stop there. There's much more, but really landing a good job is a war unless you're a star or have amazing connections. The next of my, quote, Nemkoisms is if you're using a professional resume writer to write your resume were ethical, how come no resume writer signs it written by Jane Jones resume writer? You see, employers use resumes not just as a recitation of your work history, but as an indicator of how well you think, and therefore, how well you write, which is a proxy for how well you think, how well you organize, how error-free you are. And if you're having somebody write that resume for you, it's no more ethical than you being a kid who is in high school and applying to college and having your parent or a hired gun write your college application essay. And besides, if you don't care about the ethics from a pragmatic perspective, if your resume is written in really perfect, intelligent, thoughtful English with error-free, and then in the interview you're sounding, let's just say, more lackluster, you'll have destroyed the trust that exists between you and the employer, and having good trust with the employer is critical to getting hired. Okay, the next set of my quote Nemkoisms are about succeeding on the job. This one is like this one is you're like a TV. You can fine tune but not convert a black and white set into a color one. You know, we like to believe that we are infinitely malleable, but all scientists know that we are partly genetic and partly environmental. And unless you've got the goods, I like this analogy. No matter how much you tune up a VW Bug, it's never going to beat a Ferrari in a race. So you're not going to be able to turn yourself from a dullard into a brilliant person, somebody who can't draw stick figures like me, I can't, and turn me into an artist or a pianist. I was born a pianist. I can really play. So many people, the parents torture their kids with lessons, and the kid really always, it's painful to even listen. And that's also true in terms of how cognitively demanding a job you should go for. So it's wiser to accept yourself and fine-tune, make little tweaks in your personality and your ability, etc., but better to accept your core basic skills and limitations and find a place where that natural self is going to be a better fit. So that's why I say you're like a TV. You can fine-tune, but not convert a black and white set into a color one. The next one is that happiness comes mainly from within. You know, so many people who have had misery in life think that if they just change jobs, change fields, change where they live, move to a new city, they'll do better. But generally, not generally, always, people bring themselves with them to the new job, to the new locale. And so very often the effort of changing careers is mammoth. The effort of moving to a new city is mammoth. It's usually far better to not necessarily look externally to your happiness, but to say, you know what, this is somehow the confluence of all these factors have created my life as it is. Before I go and try to radically change things externally, let me try to be happier with my status quo. Maybe tweaking your job, maybe certainly tweaking your attitude, maybe finding a better boyfriend or whatever it is, but really your happiness comes mainly from within. I am generally a sad person constitutionally, just like my father. And my wife is an upbeat person no matter what. It's just who she is. And the more vivid example is my mom and dad. My dad, as I said, is a very serious Holocaust survivor. My mom, also a Holocaust survivor from Auschwitz, but she's always been a party girl. So she's always upbeat and singing and playing and flirting and everything. You know, we are basically who we are. Even psychotherapists in long-term psychotherapy have a hard time changing people fundamentally. So it's wise to accept who you are fundamentally. Okay, the next of my, quote, Nemkoisms is microbreak. You know, there's a natural tendency that people need vacation. They need a week-long vacation, 2-week-long vacation, whatever. But so often they come back as or more stressed because preparing for the vacation is a pain. They got to get all the work in order and get people to do their work. They've got to get the whole trip planned. Then the trip is not always just, you know, cavorting in the halcyon waters in pre-orgasm. Very often there's a lot of travel hassles. Think back to the travel you've done. Weather, getting ripped off, the hotel isn't as good as you want, you got lost, you were bored in the museum, whatever the hell it was. And then you come back after all that money and time, and now you've got all that stuff to do to make up for the time. Better to do a lot of micro breaks. Of course, like when you're feeling stressed, take that deep breath or 3. Take the 1 or 3 minute break to walk down the hall or walk downstairs or even to stare outside the window. Remember that sitting is the new smoking. It is important to get out. Take the hour lunch, not 2-hour lunch. Because beyond those little micro breaks, the amount of rejuvenation benefit is dwarfed by the loss of what you got done, and sometimes there's actually more stress from taking the break. You end up feeling like a procrastinator. Okay, next. Work-life balance is overrated. If there is a phrase that's being constantly used today by people who, and I believe they're predominantly the people who aren't that successful themselves, is that work-life balance is key. Well, I can say, having had 5,500 clients, that some of the most contented, successful, contributory people I know have work lives that are utterly out of balance. They work much more than 40 hours a week, foregoing the vaunted family time playing Monopoly with their kids or long, languid dinners. You know, whether it be a cardiologist, who is a really good cardiologist and sees more patients so they don't have to wait so long, or see an inferior cardiologist, or the bricklayer, who is deciding to work after hours to build Granny's security wall. Those people generally are more contented with their lives and make more money usually than the person who's obsessed with work-life balance. So that's why I say work-life balance is overrated. Next, I say hire slow and fire fast. The most important thing that a manager or leader ever does really is hiring, because you can't do a great job leading your team if your team ain't great. Now, of course, sometimes you're stuck with people, but the huge problem is getting rid of somebody is impossible. There are so many protections against getting rid of somebody, so that you better take the time to hire slowly. Really reach out, especially to people you trust, and ask for referrals, because so many job seekers, and I can tell you this from having worked with a zillion clients, it's amazing. The more desperate the job seeker is, the more unethical they are. I mean, the most vivid example is I've had clients who have terrible references. They've been fired 6 or 7 times, and they use their boyfriend or their girlfriend as their reference, saying that their girlfriend was their boss. And, there's a million ways to fool an employer, and how they will spend big money on coaching, big money on resume writers. So it's critical normally when you're hiring to use your referral network to get people who have integrity. Of course, people lie on their resume. There are studies that show that 45%, between 30 and 50% of resumes contain, quote, creative writing. So please, if you're an employer, take your time to select people, and in the interview process, don't ask those stupid coachable questions like, tell me about yourself and what's your greatest strength and weakness. Create simulations and have them do the simulations right there, of simulations of hard but commonly required tasks on the job in front of you. That's going to be a great way to sense what they're really like. Not perfect, because sometimes people are on their best behavior, but if they can't do a good job on those, they're going to probably be bad. And then in references, there's a lot of puffery, so don't give too much credit to references. Okay, I have more of these, but I'm just in the interest of time, I'm simply going to, I'll do the next one. Interrupt. The standard advice is to never interrupt people. And yet there are plenty of people who know they're long-winded and welcome you're interrupting them, especially if you apologize and say you're just trying to make the most of our time together. And so interrupting can be appropriate if you think the person is going to be long-winded and you already got their point, and you apologize and you say you're not doing it to be rude, but to make the most of the time. Another term I use this is specifically for counselors, maybe even for friends, quick mind past traumas. Everybody's had trauma. They've been abused as a child, treated badly by a spouse, fired unfairly by a boss, God forbid, been raped, been physically, assaulted with a knife, whatever. I have generally found that whatever lessons can be learned from that past trauma are automatically learned, and maybe is worth a couple of minutes. But so often, people feel the need to vent. They've been told it's fine to keep venting and venting and venting. And all that does is it keeps top of mind the past malaise and militates against their moving forward. So what I normally will say is, that was just terrible what happened to you. Do we need to revisit it again? Or what would you think? What would the God within you think is the goddess within you is the wisest next baby step? I have had my clients make much more progress faster by not being so empathic about, oh, that was so terrible, and revisiting again and again and again. Next, another thing I do with my clients that helps empower them, I say, imagine I don't exist, that I've been beamed up to planet Pluto. What would the God or goddess within you tell you to do? That really it keeps the client having a lot of power, which is good. But sometimes I know they're not going to be able to come up with something, or they come up with ideas that I think are bad. So I can give advice while not depriving them of their agency by saying, this is my phrase, I'm wondering if you might want to do X. What do you think? What do you think are the 4 most powerful words in the English language, according to J.W. Marriott, who founded the Marriott chain? So that allows me to have my input without wresting agency from them. Another one I use is, what does that idea score on the meter? With 0 means the idea makes you puke, and 10 means it gives you ecstasy. That's a great question. And then the crucial follow-up question is, what keeps it from being a 10? And I'm going to stop there because my client has just called.